In the stillness of the night, when the world quiets down and only your thoughts remain, have you ever found yourself remembering the golden moments of your past? Moments that shaped you, people you loved, places that now exist only in memory? Tonight, we invite you to close your eyes and take a gentle journey back to those beautiful times. A journey of love, of letting go, and of finding peace at the edge of life's long road. If stories like these bring comfort to your heart and help you drift gently into sleep, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel for more heartfelt bedtime stories made just for you. It was a quiet autumn evening in a small town in Vermont. The leaves outside painted the roads in golden brown and burnt orange, whispering softly with every breeze. Inside a cozy little home on Willow Lane, a man named Henry sat by the window, wrapped in a woolen blanket that smelled faintly of cedar and thyme. Henry was 82. His hair, once dark and thick, had turned silver like the moonlight now spilling onto his lap. His eyes, though tired, still held the spark of 1,000 memories. The room around him was filled with silence, but not the empty kind. It was the warm kind of silence, the kind that follows laughter, love, and years of stories shared. Tonight felt different. Not heavy, not sad, but complete. Henry felt it in his bones, in his breath, and the way the world had slowed down just enough for him to listen to the rhythm of his own heart. He looked around his room, the family photographs on the shelves, the old radio that still worked if you tapped it just right, and the well-worn rocking chair where his late wife Margaret used to sit knitting sweaters for winters long gone. He smiled gently. Henry reached for the old leather-bound journal on the side table. Its pages were yellowed, edges curled, but every line was filled with life, his life and hers, their story. Tonight, he would read it one last time. As he opened the first page, the room seemed to exhale. The smell of ink and memories wrapped around him. The first entry was dated 1959, the year he met Margaret. I saw her by the lake, it began. She wore a green dress and had a laugh that stopped time. I didn't know then, but I just met the woman who would become the rest of my life. Henry closed his eyes and let the memory take over. He was 19 again. It was summer. The lake was alive with sunlight and the sound of distant music from someone's radio. Margaret stood at the dock, her hair catching the breeze like a flag of freedom. When their eyes met, something inside Henry had shifted. They had talked all afternoon about books, dreams, family, fear. That was the first time Henry understood what it meant to be truly seen. And in the quiet of that memory, he now smiled again. Back in the present, a gentle knock on the door pulled him out of his thoughts. It was his granddaughter, Lily, 25, with her mother's eyes and her grandmother's kindness. She entered quietly, knowing her grandfather preferred silence after sunset. "You okay, Grandpa?" she asked, her voice like a soft lullaby. He nodded. "Just traveling," he said, tapping the journal. Lily sat beside him and placed her head on his shoulder. They didn't speak much. They didn't need to. Time was a different thing now. It moved slow, like a river in late fall. And sometimes the best moments were the quiet ones, shared without words. Outside, the wind hummed like a song only the trees could hear. Henry closed his eyes once more, and the next memory welcomed him in. It was the night he proposed to Margaret. December 24th, 1960, snow falling like stars. They were both broke, freezing, but in love. He had nothing but a small silver ring he'd bought with the last of his pay. She cried when he asked, not because of the ring, but because she'd been waiting to say yes since the day at the lake. He whispered those words now as if she could hear him. "You said yes, even when I had nothing." Lily looked up. "What did you say, Grandpa?" Henry opened his eyes slowly. "I was just remembering something beautiful." And just like that, the memory faded like smoke, but the warmth remained. As night deepened, Henry leaned back into the soft cushions of his chair. A light sigh left his lips, not of sorrow, but of peace. Lily kissed his forehead before heading to the kitchen to warm up some tea. Alone again, Henry reached for the journal. The next page held a photograph of their first home. A one-bedroom cottage with chipped paint and wildflowers in the yard. He remembered how they'd painted it together, laughing more than working, and how they used to fall asleep listening to the sound of frogs by the creek. That house had been tiny, but it had held a universe inside it. Love, fights, makeups, birthdays, new beginnings, quiet evenings, and rainy mornings with coffee and jazz records. A gentle yawn escaped Henry's lips as he turned the page once more. But his mind was growing slower now, and the memories were beginning to blur at the edges. Still, they felt like home. He whispered into the room, as if to no one, "Thank you for it all." And in that room, as the world outside rested in the arms of night, Henry drifted into a sleep that was more memory than dream. The night deepened, quiet and serene, wrapping the little home on Willow Lane in a velvet hush. A soft rain had begun to fall, its gentle tapping on the windows sounding like distant lullabies. In his chair, Henry slept, not the restless sleep of old age, but a still dream-filled kind that felt like floating. Lily returned with a cup of tea, careful not to spill. She paused at the doorway when she saw him head resting gently, mouth slightly parted, the journal still resting on his lap. She smiled. "You must be dreaming of her again," she whispered to herself. She knew. Grandpa always said the best dreams were the ones with Margaret in them. Henry was dreaming. He was back in the cottage, young, strong, barefoot on the wooden floor, laughter echoing through the walls. Margaret was in the kitchen, humming a tune, her hair in a messy bun, flower on her cheek. It was a Sunday morning in 1963. They had just found out they were expecting their first child. He could see her clearly, like it was only yesterday. She turned around and looked at him, eyes glowing, holding her tiny belly. "I hope it's a girl," she said. "I hope she has your laugh," Henry replied. The dream moved forward, like flipping pages in a picture book. Now he was holding their baby, Emma, for the first time. She was so small, wrapped in a yellow blanket, yawning against his chest. Margaret looked at him from the hospital bed with tears of joy. "You're going to be a wonderful father, Henry." The words echoed, softened, and faded back in the waking world. The clock struck midnight. Lily gently covered her grandfather with another blanket and placed the cup of tea beside the lamp. She turned off the overhead light, leaving only the warm glow of the reading lamp by his chair. Henry stirred slightly, murmuring something under his breath. His fingers brushed the edge of the journal. The next memory waited for him. It was 1972. Emma was now 9. Henry and Margaret had taken her on a road trip across the country in an old blue van. No SE, no GPS, just paper maps and open highways. They had stopped at roadside diners, camped under the stars, and laughed like teenagers again. He remembered one night in particular camping in Colorado. The sky had been a black velvet sheet filled with stars. Margaret and Emma were wrapped in sleeping bags, whispering about constellations. Henry had stepped away from the fire, staring up in silence. In that moment, he had felt it, what it meant to be truly alive. Not in the noise, but in the stillness. In love, family, and presence. And now, all these years later, in the silence of his home, he felt it again. Lily had fallen asleep on the couch, the fire burning low in the hearth. The house felt timeless. Henry's breath slowed as he turned another page. This one was harder to read. The handwriting trembled. The ink looked heavier. It was dated 1998, the year Margaret passed. "My darling left me today," it read. "Not forever, just ahead of me." She said goodbye with her eyes, not her voice. I held her hand until it was still. The silence wasn't empty, it was full of her. Full of everything we had built together. Henry's hand trembled now too, gently caressing the page. He remembered that day like it had never ended. The hospital room, the beeping machines, the way Margaret had smiled through the pain, whispering, "It's okay, my love. You'll be all right." But he wasn't sure he ever really was. He had lived after her. He had watched Emma grow, seen her marry, seen Lily born, watched generations rise. But part of him had always remained in that room with Margaret. Now it felt like the distance between them was no longer so wide. In the dream, Margaret appeared again. This time older, as he remembered her, wearing the same pale blue dress from their 40th anniversary. She was standing in the field behind their cottage, sunlight all around her. She smiled. "It's almost time, Henry." He reached for her hand. It felt warm, familiar, real. "I missed you," he said. "I know, but you lived, and you loved. That's all we were meant to do." A peaceful warmth spread through his chest. He wanted to stay here forever. But something told him there were a few more pages left. He blinked, and the vision faded. The fire crackled softly. The rain had stopped. Henry opened his eyes slowly. The room looked the same, but felt different. Softer, lighter. He looked at Lily, asleep under a quilt her grandmother had sewn. He smiled. "I did live, didn't I?" he whispered. Outside, dawn began to kiss the sky with soft light. Morning was near. But Henry wasn't afraid. He picked up the journal once more. Only a few pages remained, and his story was almost complete. The first light of morning crept softly into the room, painting everything in a gentle gold. The fire in the hearth had gone quiet, leaving behind the scent of ash and comfort. Lily stirred on the couch, her eyes blinking open to the warmth of a new day. She turned her head and saw Henry still resting in his chair, the old journal resting on his chest, one hand gently draped over it, as though guarding something sacred. She walked over and touched his shoulder. His eyes fluttered open. "Good morning, Grandpa," she whispered with a smile. Henry smiled back. His voice was soft like the last note of a lullaby. "Morning, sweetheart. I was just visiting the past again." Lily leaned down, picking up the journal from his chest and placing it on the side table. "Do you want some breakfast?" she asked gently. He shook his head. "Not just yet. I'd like to read a little more, if that's all right." "Of course." She kissed his forehead. "Take your time. I'll be in the kitchen." Henry watched her go. The quiet grace in her steps reminded him so much of Margaret. He looked back at the journal, running his fingers along the cover. So many memories, so much life. He opened it again, and the next entry waited. It was from the year 2004, Lily's birth. "My granddaughter arrived today, tiny pink and beautiful like spring after a long winter. Emma held her in her arms, and I saw in her eyes the same love I once saw in Margaret's, the same fierce, gentle love that changes everything. I didn't think I'd ever feel this full again, but love finds its way back." Henry's eyes watered, not from pain, but from the overflowing warmth of that day. He remembered standing by the nursery window, watching tiny Lily wrapped in a blanket, yawning like a kitten. That moment had reminded him that even though some chapters end, new ones begin. His fingers flipped through more entries, each one shorter than the last, but each full of presents, birthdays, Sunday mornings, long drives with Emma and Lily, holidays spent laughing, even when the house grew quieter over time. Small moments that didn't seem important back then, but now felt like treasure. One entry stood out, 2011. "Today I walked to the old bench by the lake. The same place I met Margaret. The water hasn't changed. The trees still whisper our story. I sat there for hours and felt her with me, not like a ghost, but like sunlight, gentle and warm, as if she wanted me to know she never really left." Henry sighed deeply. That bench, that lake. He had gone there every year since she passed, and every time he had whispered the same thing to the wind. "I loved you then. I love you still. I always will." He reached the last page of the journal. It was blank. He paused, then slowly picked up the pen beside him and began to write, his hand shaking but his heart steady. If you're reading this, I want you to know I am not afraid. Life was not always easy, but it was full. I loved deeply, lost gently, and lived kindly. I am ready now, not because I'm tired, but because I've arrived. And I know, somewhere just beyond this room, Margaret is waiting at the edge of a field, and I will run to her. He set the pen down and closed the journal. Henry leaned back in his chair, feeling the weight of peace settle over him like a soft quilt. The ticking of the old wall clock was steady and slow. The birds outside had begun to sing. His eyes felt heavy again, but not like before. This was different. This was surrender. He heard the distant sound of the lake again, the wind through trees, and faintly a voice. Henry. He smiled. He saw the field, the wildflowers, the blue sky, and Margaret. She stood in the sunlight, arms open, her smile the same as the day he first saw her by the water. He took a step forward, not in body, but in soul. And the house on Willow Lane, filled with morning light and generations of love, held him one last time as Henry slipped gently into a sleep that wasn't sleep at all. It was going home. Time had slowed to a stillness beyond words. Henry's body rested quietly in the chair by the window, while his spirit had already begun its quiet journey elsewhere, where memories are more than echoes, and love is something you can touch again. He stood now in a place that felt both familiar and otherworldly. The air was soft, like the breath between songs. The light around him was golden, stretching endlessly like a forever sunset. He looked down at his hand strong again, no more shaking, no more pain. He felt younger, freer, and deeply calm. Ahead of him was the field. Wildflowers danced gently in the breeze. And just beyond them, under the tall oak tree, stood Margaret. She hadn't aged a day since he last saw her in his dreams. Her hair was pinned the way she used to wear it on Sunday afternoons. She wore the same blue dress she had on during their 40th anniversary. Her smile was full of light. "Henry," she said, her voice like a warm blanket on a cold morning. He walked toward her slowly at first, then faster, until his arms were around her and the years between them simply vanished. "I missed you," he whispered. "I was never far," she said, resting her head against his chest. They stood there in silence for a while, breathing in the peace of reunion. There was no rush here, no clocks, no illness. Only time stretched out like a gentle stream, winding through all they had ever shared. "I kept everything," Henry said softly. "The journal, the photos, your laugh." Margaret looked up, and I watched you. Every birthday, every tear, every time you sat by the lake or held Lily close. I was there. He felt her hand take his, warm and firm. She led him through the field, past memories made into flowers, each one glowing faintly with the light of a life well lived. He saw them. Emma as a little girl with scraped knees and crooked pigtails. Lily's first steps. Margaret's hands weaving a scarf by the fire. Sunday dinners, road trips, even quiet nights with soft jazz in the background. They were all here, blooming in this place where time could not steal them. Then Margaret turned to him. "It's not just our memories here, Henry. Yours will grow too. Every story you left behind will bloom in Lily, in Emma, and every heart you touched." Henry looked down the hill and saw something beautiful Lily, years from now, older, sitting with her own children, reading the journal, telling them about a man named Henry who loved with his whole heart. Tears filled his eyes, not from sorrow, but from gratitude. "You see," Margaret smiled, "you lived a golden life." He smiled back, "And you were the gold in it." They stood hand in hand, watching the field of their love stretch on. No regrets. No pain, only peace. Only home. Back in the little house, Lily sat beside her grandfather, her hand resting over his. The journal was closed now. The lamp glowed softly. The wind outside was still. She didn't cry anymore. She simply sat there, breathing in the love that filled the room. She whispered to him, even though she knew he was already far beyond, "You found her, didn't you?" And in that moment, somewhere in the place beyond dreams, Henry looked up toward the sky new stars being born overhead and smiled. "Yes," he whispered into eternity. "I did." The sun had risen high above Willow Lane, casting soft shadows across the garden where Lila had just begun to bloom. Inside the little house, everything remained still peaceful, as if the world itself had paused in reverence. Lily stood in the living room, holding her grandfather's journal close to her chest. Tears shimmered in her eyes, not of sorrow alone, but of deep, overwhelming love. She had found him that morning, still in his chair, wrapped in the blanket, his face soft and calm, smiling, as though dreaming of someone he had longed to see. There had been no struggle, no fear, just stillness and peace. The old clock ticked softly in the background, and the scent of rain still lingered in the air. Henry's story had reached its final page. But in Lily's hands, the story wasn't ending, it was beginning again. She opened the journal, flipping through the pages her grandfather had written over the years, each one a breath from the past. Each line filled with a life lived so deeply, so fully, so beautifully. The last entry was still fresh, the ink barely dry. "I am ready now, not because I'm tired, but because I've arrived. And I know, somewhere just beyond this room, Margaret is waiting at the edge of a field, and I will run to her." Lily pressed her hand to her mouth, the words echoing in her soul. She whispered, "You found her, didn't you, Grandpa?" Outside, the wind danced through the trees. That evening, as the family gathered, stories flowed like a gentle stream. Emma, now older, sat beside her daughter and held her hand. Photos were passed around, laughter mixed with tears. They spoke not of loss, but of legacy. "Your grandfather taught me what love means," Emma said softly. "He didn't just live life, he listened to it," Lily nodded. "He gave us all a map through his memories." Later that night, when the house had gone quiet again, Lily returned to the old armchair. She sat where her grandfather had sat, the journal still in her lap. But this time she opened to a fresh page, and she began to write. "Dear Grandpa, I miss you already, but I feel you everywhere, in the wind, in the firelight, in the laughter of your great-grandchildren someday. I'll keep your stories alive. And one day, when I'm old and gray, I'll sit by a window like you did. I'll read this journal, and I'll smile, knowing that love never really leaves us." She closed the journal slowly. The house, once filled with Henry's footsteps, now held something more, his presence, not in body, but in warmth. In the walls he painted, in the floorboards that creaked with memories, in the love that lingered long after breath had gone. Somewhere beyond time and place, Henry stood in a sunlit field. The lake sparkled nearby. Margaret stood beneath the old oak tree, wearing the same pale blue dress she always wore in his dreams. He walked to her, lighter than ever, his heart whole again. She smiled. "You made it, my love." He reached for her hand, and this time it was forever. And as the world below continued its slow, sweet rhythm, the stars above twinkled just a little brighter, as if one more soul had found its peace. The end of life was just the beginning of something timeless, and the golden old days were never truly gone. They simply waited patiently in the heart.